Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Carving It Up Live right here on Facebook Live, YouTube, and on Twitter. As always, I am Bryson Carver. It's great to be with y'all on this Monday evening. We've got a great show for y'all tonight. NFL preseason week 2 wraps up tonight. I think I saw it was the Jets. Is it Cincinnati they're playing? I don't know. I know the Jets are playing tonight on Monday Night Football, so maybe get Joe Flacco some reps before that week 1 game, ironically, against the Baltimore Ravens. But we got a lot to talk about today. Tom Brady has ended his 2-week sabbatical. He is back in Tampa Bay Buccaneers training camp. I'll discuss that, as well as, by the way, we got the reason why he was off for 2 weeks. And can't say I really blame him. You know, when you look at it, I'll talk about that, as well as the continued disrespect of my man, Damian Lillard. Put some spec on that man's name. I'm going to discuss that, as well as Lamar Jackson. Ravens got to give him his money while they can. I talked about it last week. I'll talk about it at the end of the show today. And in between, it looks like there's another possible suitor for Kevin Durant, although it doesn't look like they're going to make a serious offer. I'll discuss that later in the show. But first, we got a bombshell on Saturday night involving the Las Vegas Raiders. It was actually before the fight last night. It wasn't just Usman getting dropped, although that was wow. But during sort of this pre-fight show that they were doing on ESPN, where you had, I think Michael Eaves from SportsCenter was hosting it, and Gronk was on there. And these hosts, they were interviewing Dana White, you all know, UFC president. And Dana White was talking about how close that Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski came to come into Las Vegas to play for the Raiders. Remember, that was their inaugural season in Sin City in 2020. In fact, Dana White said, quote, "There was a story in free agency. One of the teams, they were interested." Oh, I'm sorry. I'm reading the Brady quote. My bad. Yeah, here we go. So, Dana White, according to the broadcast the other night, claims that he was working on getting Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski to the Las Vegas Raiders in 2020, but John Gruden decided in the last minute that he didn't want to do it. Gronk said in the broadcast, quote, "That's exactly what happened." So it's confirmed. Dana White says it, and one of the people literally involved in this operation, one of the guys that was going to come to the team, says, "Yeah, that's he's telling the truth. That was what was going to happen." So, and I'll get into sort of Tom's quotes from the shop about a year and a half ago. This sort of ties into this. But does it shock me that there's two things? One thing shocks me, one does not. What shocks me is that Brady and Gronk almost chose to go to Vegas. That makes no sense. We know the ownership. Mark Davis seemed like a good enough guy, but it's questionable at best. Really, ever since the end of Al Davis's life owning the Raiders and continuing into Mark Davis owning the Raiders, it's been pretty rocky, right? They've hired some bad, flat out bad people running the football operations and the coaching staff. They've done some terrible contracts over the past decade. The Raiders just haven't been that great at running business. But they happen to have Derek Carr, one of the most steady presence, one of the biggest steady presences in the NFL. And you had Devontae Adams, obviously, who's arguably the best receiver in football. So they've locked up in some regard or another. But it surprises me that a guy like Tom Brady, very buttoned up, very meticulous in every single decision he makes, very obsessed with the process, almost chose the Las Vegas Raiders. Now you might say, well, let's not act like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were the model of consistency, except for the fact that they were consistently average to bad. Sure, but they had some extremely talented guys on the roster, and Bruce Arians was a respected head coach. Okay, Bruce Arians, had so many quarterbacks that had their best season under him. Whereas John Gruden, his first couple of years in Las Vegas was rough. They would start out okay and then absolutely, nosedive at the end of the season. And we know now, ever since John Gruden resigned from being the Raiders coach a little less than a year ago, we know the sort of control freak that he was in that organization, and especially how resistant he was to change. most specifically, the change of the football culture, the change of the NFL culture. John didn't really evolve terribly well to that. But we know one thing about John Gruden. I mean, he loved being a celebrity. He loved the Chucky image. He loved being on Monday Night Football. He was great on Monday Night Football, right? Big personality. I mean, he's perfect for the media. Perfect to be in the media and perfect for the media to cover, right? He has some fiery press conferences, have some sort of catchphrase or saying. Remember Hard Knocks, knock on wood if you're with me? Remember? Yeah, like that was it was the big personality of John Gruden. He enjoyed being sort of the face of the Las Vegas Raiders, just like he enjoyed it 2 decades ago when he was the head coach of the Oakland Raiders and then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So, does it surprise me, according to Dana White, that John Gruden wasn't going to be cool with Brady and Gronk coming into the building? Yeah, because they'd have replaced him as the faces of the Raiders, right? Because we know the personality that Gronk is. I mean, Gronk's Gronk. He is, nothing is going to change that. And Tom Brady, don't matter where he goes, he is the face of the franchise. Even when he was in New England, where you have Belichick and Kraft, Tom was the face of that operation. We see now he was by a mile the most important cog in that operation. So John Gruden was not going to take being second or most likely third fiddle to those two. He wasn't going to take that very well. The second thing, that sort of, that's kind of the thing that doesn't surprise me, is that John Gruden didn't want this to go down. But let's go back to an interview that Tom Brady did on The Shop. Right? For those of you that don't know, it's uninterrupted at LeBron's production company. LeBron has this show, comes on, I'd say, once every month or so. Maybe they'll do 2 episodes a month, just depending on whatever their schedule is. But usually LeBron's in the episode. Maverick Carter, his business manager, is almost always in the episode. And they get all kinds of people. They get athletes. They get people in entertainment, rappers, actors. They get them all in this one room, this barbershop, and they, usually they talk business, they talk their careers, they talk about outside perceptions. They talk about stuff that millionaires would talk about, right? In some cases, in the case of LeBron, billionaires. It's an interesting show. It's an entertaining show. Well, Tom Brady was on the show last year, and he had this infamous quote. There was a story in free agency, one of the teams, they were interested, and all of a sudden, they weren't interested at the very end. I was sitting there thinking, you're sticking with that bleeper? Are you serious? When I look back, I'm like, there's no bleeping way I would have went to that team. But they said they didn't want me, and I know what that means. I know what that feels like, and I'm going to blank you up because of that. Apparently now that we know it's Derek Carr. Okay, we guessed for a long time. My guess was San Francisco, because we know the animosity that Brady had for Jimmy Garoppolo. So much so that he went to Kraft, Bob Kraft in New England, said, trade him. Because Belichick was considering replacing Tom with Garoppolo. Garoppolo was probably the most popular backup in the league. Tom's like, nah, I want this guy out of the building. I don't want this guy anywhere near this franchise. And Bob Kraft did it, traded him to the San Francisco 49ers. And there were numerous reports around that time, if you remember, that John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan were sort of arguing, going back and forth as to whether they should go out and get Tom Brady in free agency. You got to remember, the Niners had just come off of a Super Bowl appearance. They had lost to Kansas City with, Jimmy Garoppolo being the quarterback of that team. I can't remember who was on whose side, whether John Lynch was pro-Jimmy or Kyle Shanahan was pro-Jimmy. All I know is that they were going back and forth between whether they should keep Jimmy Garoppolo as their quarterback or go after Brady. And given that Tom is a Bay Area kid, I mean, heck, he was at the NFC Championship game back in 1982 when the late, great Dwight Clark made the catch in the end zone on the pass from Joe Montana that sent the Niners to their first Super Bowl and kind of launched the dynasty of the 80s. So it's, I assume okay, it only makes sense that Tom will want to play for his hometown team. They're ready to win a Super Bowl now. Heck, they almost won it without him. And then so they decide to go with Jimmy Garoppolo. That's who I thought Tom was referring to. Apparently, he was referring to Derek Carr. Okay, so, and y'all know Derek Carr is my guy. I loved it. I always said there's 3 quarterbacks. I'm going to talk about one of them at the end of the show. But there's 3 quarterbacks who I despise the hate that they get, and I defend them like crazy on the show, and that's Dak Prescott, Lamar Jackson, and Derek Carr. They don't get enough credit for how great they are. And so, I'm going to defend my guy Derek Carr for a second here. Because you got to realize he's in an organization that up until this year hasn't given him a whole lot of help. I mean, just now this offseason, they gave him Devontae Adams, which that almost felt like a thank you to Derek Carr. Like, you have been such a rock for this franchise for 8 years. We're going to reward you with a guy who might be the best receiver in football. Like, it's like, yeah, it's about dang time you helped this dude out for once, right? He's had how many head coaches? 4 or 5? Like, help the dude out a little. And so the one thing that surprised me a little bit, not that John Gruden didn't want Brady and Gronk in the building. That didn't surprise me at all. But that it came at the expense of keeping Derek Carr, because we know a lot of reports came out of Las Vegas for the, however long it was, 3.5 seasons, really 3.25 seasons that Gruden and Carr were together. Didn't get along that well. I mean, we heard numerous reports about how Gruden wanted to trade Derek Carr. But because it was Tom Brady, the face of the league, and certainly would have been the face of the Raiders, Gruden's like, nah, I'm not for that. So I'm just throwing that out there. And by the way, it's worth noting that when the Buccaneers played the Raiders, it actually was that season in 2020. It was at Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas. The Buccaneers won 45-20. Tom Brady threw for 369 yards, 4 touchdowns, no picks, had a QBR is 0-100. He had a QBR of 83.8, and then had a passer rating of 127. So we know the great athletes, the truly great ones, they remember those who doubted them, who shunned them, and they make them pay in the end. So that's what Tom Brady did in 2020 against the Las Vegas Raiders. But very, very interesting story. I'm surprised that of all the suitors, we know the Chargers went after Tom. We know the Bucs went after Tom. And there was at least reports that the San Francisco 49ers and the Tennessee Titans were at least considering it. But the fact that Tom was going to agree, and Gronk, obviously, they were going to agree to go to Vegas, as dysfunctional as Tampa Bay had been to that point, they at least had a little bit of stability. Right? Bruce Arians, we knew, established coach, right? Has won this league. His style of offense has worked. We know you got Todd Bowles as the defensive coordinator. Todd Bowles now the head coach of the Buccaneers, right? You've got a ton of talent on the defensive side of the ball, Levante David and Devin White. You added Ndamukong Suh. Yeah, offensively, you got, arguably the best receiver tandem in football with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, 2 1,000-yard guys before Brady got there. Like, you had talent in Tampa, and you had at least a little bit of stability. It just felt like you plug in a true franchise quarterback, and maybe this franchise can go places, and go places they did. They won the Super Bowl that season. Vegas. I mean, if nothing else, it's a little bit chaotic and tumultuous because they were moving from Oakland to Vegas. And historically, teams that move their first season in their new city, they don't do so well. Never forget the Los Angeles Rams. They go from St. Louis to Los Angeles in 2016. They went 4-12 that year. Now, since they've never had a losing season. Obviously, they hired Sean McVay. That helped things a little bit, but it matters where you go. So we'll see. Barry Grant Jr., All Even Podcast, shout out to him. He says, Raiders made the right choice. That defense was not built for a Super Bowl run like how Tampa was. Yeah, and the thing is, I don't want to say the Raiders made the right choice. I'm still going Brady over Carr, and I freaking love Carr. But this was the GOAT we're talking about, and he could have given you 3 years, looking at it now. And again, I'll talk about Brady's return to Tampa training camp later in the show. But would the Raiders have won a Super Bowl if Tom and Gronk had joined? I agree with you, Barry. They would not have won the Super Bowl. Would they have won the division? Still doubt that. That was going to belong to Kansas City. It felt like unless the Raiders had either made a trade or gone after some guys in free agency, they probably weren't going anywhere in terms of having like true legit playoff success like Tampa Bay. Again, it felt like Tampa Bay was really just kind of a quarterback and then a few pieces here and there away from really competing. And so, yeah, that defense, and really I feel like, Barry, I still feel like that defense hasn't quite recovered. That's really the biggest reason that I have any reservations about the Raiders in terms of getting to the playoffs in that brutal AFC West. is the defense, more specifically the secondary. Secondary in Vegas is bad. Like it was, if it weren't for how bad their secondary was in that wild card game against the Bengals, Raiders could have easily won that football game. They still almost won it, even as bad as their secondary played. So that's a big weakness in their defense. And even for Tampa, even though I would call that the weakness in their defense, the secondary is still very, very good. You got Antoine Winfield, you got Carlton Davis. Like you had some players. Vegas in the back end did not. I still can't really get through my head that Tom was going to choose them. I mean, considering you had the Chargers who were loaded and a better run organization than the Raiders. Tampa was, and then obviously the Niners, the Titans are, although their interest in Tom Brady is still kind of debated as to how deep that went. But who knows? Over the years, we'll probably learn more and more about this. Well, not just about this, just about the interest in Tom Brady in 2020. You'll probably have some documentaries. You'll have Tom himself, once he retires, be a little more open and honest about, that spring of 2020 free agency. But hey, just got to wait and see. But I thought that was a very, very interesting revelation by Dana White, and interesting that Gronk was just like, yeah, absolutely. Just came out right front and said, yep, that happened. But hey, such is the NFL offseason, right? We get a few stories like that every year. Speaking of offseason stories, we're in the NBA offseason. We're a little further away from starting the NBA season as opposed to the NFL season, of course. Let's see, today's August 22nd, so we got 17 days. So 2 weeks from Thursday, it's football time, baby. A little bit of college football starts this weekend. I know my Tennessee Vols play their first game, and I'll predict the Vols schedule at some point in the next week and a half. But the Vols play on Thursday, September 1st, so a week from Thursday. So looking forward to that. And the college football opening weekend, it's okay. Georgia, Oregon's an interesting game. The one I'm really looking forward to watching is Alabama, Texas, because we know Texas is kind of in that upward trajectory. They've recruited very well. We know that crowd in Austin is going to be rocking. I'm sure McConaughey will be there. Like, it'll just be an electric atmosphere. Bama still should win, but Texas is absolutely going in the right direction. So that'll definitely be on my radar without a question in week 2. But back to the NBA. I just finished talking about the quarterbacks that I feel like gets disrespected way too much, and that's Dak, Carr, and Lamar. In the NBA, I haven't put together a similar list like that yet. I probably should, but I'll tell you one guy that will definitely be in it, and that's Damian Lillard. The consistent disrespect that this man gets is beyond me. So, Taylor Rooks, very, very talented journalist. She's got a show. She has NBA players on, and she had Jason Tatum on her show. And they were talking about, superstars and all this, and the conversation sort of came around to Kyrie Irving, who, of course, we know was Jason Tatum's teammate for a couple of years in Boston. And they were discussing, about him being a superstar. And then the conversation started to shift to Damian Lillard. Is he a superstar? And when that question was posed, Taylor Rooks said, quote, "I think that Damian has all the superstar qualities, but it's hard to put him in it at this moment. Obviously, he has it in him. He's got to win. He's got to get there." So she's essentially saying he's got it in him, but he's got to win. So first of all, to say, and by the way, in this interview, both she and Jason Tatum didn't really have a choice. He was former teammates with Kyrie after all, but both of them said Kyrie's a superstar, Damian Lillard is not, which, simply put, they got it wrong. It's reversed. Dame's a superstar. Kyrie's not. Kyrie's amazing. You want to talk about somebody who has superstar qualities and gifts and talents. Kyrie has both. But we all know, for a multitude of reasons that I'll get into in just a second, Kyrie's not in that superstar category. We know, in terms of point guards, it's Steph's world, and everybody's just living in it. Okay? Luka Doncic, to me, is unquestionably number 2. It goes Steph, Luka, in that order. I don't think anybody debate. Even if you want to put Luka over Steph, which I don't really get, it's still, to me, that those are the top 2 guys. The question is, who's 3? You debate guys like Dame. You debate guys like Kyrie. Trae Young possibly. But to me, if you're debating between Dame and Kyrie, who the third best point guard in basketball is, it's Dame. It's not even close, in my opinion. Can we just sit back for a second and understand how great Damian Lillard is? Because we know about Steph, not just that he's the greatest shooter in NBA history, but he's sort of the originator of taking 30-foot, 35-foot bombs, right? And it being a good shot. Like Steph pulls up from just a couple steps inside a half court. We're like, I'm cool with that. Of course, Steph can pull that shot. Dame's one of the only other guys that we feel the same about. They call him Logo Lillard because a lot of his three-point shots, his heel is at the logo at half court, that whatever arena they're playing at, the team's logo. His heels are at the logo at half court. They call him Logo Lillard. There's one thing, without question, Dame is better at than Kyrie that I don't think people give him enough credit for being better at than Kyrie. Scoring. Now, Kyrie has always been one of the most efficient scorers in the NBA, but in terms of volume, in terms of where you want it, when you want it, what time you need it, Dame's better than Kyrie. I was looking at this, and it's really incredible. So we think about all the great scorers in today's game. LeBron, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, Giannis, Harden at one point. Harden to the side. 60-point games. LeBron has 1. Steph has 1. KD has none. Bradley Beal has 1. Tatum has 1. Kyrie Irving, 1. Damian Lillard, 3. James Harden has 4. Dame is in second. Among active players, Damian Lillard has 3 60-point games in his career. Okay, that should count for something, right? He has 2 more than Steph, 2 more than Kyrie, 2 more than LeBron, 3 more than KD. So he's a better scorer than Kyrie. Something else, too. Part of what adds to you being a superstar. I've always said I can't call you a superstar if you're not there enough. Okay? We know about Kyrie's number of absences he's had in his career. Whether it's for injuries, he's had trouble staying healthy, whether it's for the vaccination thing last year, or whether it's just for some weird reason he makes up during a season, which has kind of become the theme for the last few years. In his career, Damian Lillard, 82 games a season, Damian Lillard averages playing 71 out of 82 games a season. Keep in mind, he only played 29 last year because of injury. And still, even counting that, he averages 71 games played per year. Kyrie, 55. So as great as Kyrie is, you don't know if he's going to be out there. And Kyrie's career high games played in a season is 75. That came almost 10 years ago. So ever since, you're having 54 games. In 2020, he only played 20 games. Last year, 29 games. So Dame is more available than Kyrie. Both, as a basketball player, being out there for his team, physically he's more reliable. He doesn't get hurt as much as Kyrie. Mentally, Dame is ready to go whenever you need him. Kyrie is not. Something else, too. People say Kyrie is more clutch than Damian Lillard. Now, Kyrie is extremely clutch. He hit one of the clutchest shots in NBA history in Game 7 of the Finals against my Warriors. It was one of the clutchest shots ever. To me, the clutchest shot ever is Ray Allen in 2013 against the Spurs, but Kyrie's isn't that far behind. But something that Kyrie cannot say in regards to the clutch that Damian Lillard and one other guy in NBA history can say. So when we talk about not game-winning playoff buzzer beaters, we're talking series-ending. So not just if you hit a shot at the gun and you win the game. No. You hit the shot at the gun and the series is over, you advance. Not just you win the game, you advance. You end another team's season on one shot. Damian Lillard has done that twice against the Rockets in 2014 and against the Thunder in 2019. Only one man in NBA history can say he's done the same. Maybe you've heard of him. He happens to own the Charlotte Hornets. Played for a little while for the Chicago Bulls. You might have heard of him. Michael Jordan. Yeah, only guy outside of Damian Lillard that can say he's hit 2 series-ending buzzer beaters. So Dame is more clutch than Kyrie. He's a better distance shooter than Kyrie. He's more available than Kyrie. He's a better scorer than Kyrie. Something else, too. We all agree. Steph is the greatest shooter of all time. I've argued Klay is the second greatest shooter of all time. Because as I've always said on my show, all the three-point records that Steph doesn't have, Klay has. Well, except for one. He used to have the record for most threes made in a playoff game. Yeah, Dame broke that record a couple years ago, or a year and a half ago, I should say. He hit 12 threes in a playoff game. And in that game, he scored 55. And we know in the playoffs, it's all about matchups. Teams have all series long. They basically have 2 weeks to game plan all throughout the series. And they are focused on stopping one guy in a Portland Trail Blazers uniform. Still can't stop him. That, to me, is the definition of a superstar, is when an entire game plan is surrounded on stopping you, and you still get buckets. You still get yours. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what they throw at you. You still get yours. So we talk about availability, shooting, scoring, clutch time. Dame's got Kyrie beaten all of those categories. So the fact that we sit here and say, some out there sitting here and say that you take Kyrie over Dame, I don't know what you're talking about. She also talked about Taylor Rook's also talking about, and I'm not just saying this to rip Taylor Rook. She's very good at her job. But she said that Damian Lillard needed to win more, right? Because Kyrie's been in more winning situations. Yeah, it's because Kyrie played with LeBron James. That helps a little bit. Okay? You can't hit clutch shots in the finals if you don't get there. And not to say Kyrie didn't play a big part in those Cavs teams reaching 3 straight finals and them winning in 2016, because he did. No question. But it was LeBron leading that. Let's not play around with this. LeBron was the man in Cleveland. Kyrie was Robin. So you're telling me if you put Damian Lillard in Cleveland with LeBron James in 2016, you're telling me that the Cavs don't win the finals? Come on now. But if you put Kyrie in Portland, they have the same amount of success. They don't. When Kyrie is the man, which Damian Lillard has been his whole career, it's either been lottery. His teams are so bad they're in the lottery. They barely make the playoffs. And if they do, Kyrie's miserable. Look at 2019. Look at his first 3 years of his career, 2011 to 2014. There's levels to this. When Kyrie's the man, his teams are better without him. When Dame's the man, his team is so bad they actually have to start tanking to get a high draft pick. So there's levels to this. Give me Damian Lillard over Kyrie Irving any day of the week. Kobe told y'all what that man was made of when he was a rookie. Go back and look what Kobe Bryant said after the very first time he played Damian Lillard. I think it was in 2012. And see what he said about that man. He's different. He's different. I always say, I always respected Dame. I became a Dame fan when he hit that series-ending buzzer beat against OKC and I would have had a problem if he went out there, pumping his fist and, celebrating with the crowd. Dame's facial expression did not change. And he just, bye-bye, just waved goodbye to the Thunder as he ended their season. The whole arena, it's bedlam. It is mayhem in Portland. And Dame's facial expression doesn't change. He just looks over at Oklahoma City and waves them goodbye. I mean, he's getting mobbed by his teammates. Facial expressions still don't change. Like, that dude's cold. He's a cold-blooded assassin. Let's give that man his respect he deserves. He told you on the bubble, put some respect on my name. He's also the best rapper in the NBA, and it ain't even close. Dame Dollar. Respect Dame Dollar. All right. I had to get out the way. I saw that this morning. I'm like, the disrespect for Dame is ridiculous. I really don't get it. I don't get it. Yet, has he never beaten Steph in the playoffs? He's 0-10, sure. If you're going to use that as the knock, fine. But, usually against, look at the Toronto Raptors against LeBron. Toronto's a very well-run franchise, but when they ran into LeBronto, as they called him, They cowered in fear. Of course they did. It's LeBron James. Of course Damian Lillard hasn't beaten Steph Curry ever in the playoffs. It's Steph Curry, for crying out loud. Okay? Steph's on a different level than Dame, but that's because Steph is one of the 10 greatest players of all time. That doesn't diminish what Dame is. So let's just be honest about this. All right. I had to get that off my chest about my man Dame Dollar. Back to the NFL and back to Tom Brady. So he came back to Bucs practice today, Bucs training camp today, after a 2-week sabbatical, if you will. And initially, when he took time off, there was a little bit concerned, like, okay, wait, does this have anything to do with, we know his mom has battled cancer. For what we know right now, it looks like she's doing great. That's awesome. Does this have anything to do with his dad or just any health issue in the family? Thankfully, it's not the case. He was just taking 2 weeks off. And I suggest in the show, it's possible that during his very brief 41-day retirement that he and the family, Giselle, the kids, they scheduled a vacation around this time of year, right? So, maybe that was possible. And so, Tom wanted to fulfill his commitment to the trip, to the vacation, to his family, because, we know he's talked about that a lot in recent years, wanting to be around his family more. And so he wanted to fulfill that commitment. And it looks like that's exactly the case, because according to Pro Football Network, quote, league sources indicated that Brady's time away from the team included a trip to the Bahamas at an exclusive resort and primarily for family time with his wife, Gisele Bündchen. His commitment to family and having a personal life was at the heart of this hiatus from football, and there was no medical emergency as speculated or other reasons. As important as football is to Brady, so is his family, and the Buccaneers have given him space to be with them. Todd Bowles, the head coach. Bowles emphasized that Brady not being with the team was planned and communicated. A league source said that Brady was definitely not expected to retire again and would fulfill his commitments to his coaches and teammates. It was suggested that, hey, is Tom going to retire again? I was like, I would be like just stunned if that were the case, because there's no way that Tom is going to retire, then decide to come back. Tampa Bay centers their entire offseason around basically one last dance, one last run with the GOAT, try and go win a Super Bowl, put all their chips to the middle of the table, and he quits cold turkey on him, and Tampa's just stuck. Tom's not going to do him like that. But I think it's, it makes sense. Again, and as John Rivera says, John puts it well, he can do whatever he wants. He's Tom Brady. Right, he's earned the right, 7 rings in, 20, this now year 23 years in to, during training camp. If this was during the season, if this was in December down the stretch, okay, maybe there'd be a little bit more sort of side eye, like, what's going on here? He's taking time off during the season, but it's during training camp. Let's be real. We know how Tom Brady takes care of his body in the offseason. We understand his incredible football IQ, having played 23 years in the NFL. Tampa's playbook didn't change because who's their offensive coordinator? Oh gosh, I'm blanking. I'm blanking on their offensive coordinator again. I can't believe it. But Byron Leftwich, that's who it was. Byron Leftwich. Byron Leftwich isn't going anywhere. Todd Bowles, once he became the Bucs head coach, he retained Byron Leftwich. We know he and Brady have a great rapport. Playbook's not changing. Outside of a couple of guys coming in, Tampa Bay's offense isn't going to change that much in terms of skill position players. And so Tom's used to those guys. He worked out with them in the offseason. He takes care of his body. So training camp is not near as important to him as it is to other guys. The biggest concern I have for Tampa, well, 2 big concerns. Number one, I think I do have a little bit concern about if Tom, not that he's committed. We know he's committed. You got to be committed to play at the level that Tom has played in the NFL for as long as he has, and even coming into this year. But we've heard a lot of interviews, and I pointed back to the end of last season before the first retirement. He was using words that he had never used in his career, even after winning Super Bowls, like fulfilling, satisfied. He talked more than he ever had about spending time with his family, which, it's understandable. The guy plays as long as he has. Of course, he wants to spend time with his family at some point. But I do worry a little bit about his commitment in that regard, right? You have the vacation. Again, no problem with that. But is there a little bit of commitment issues, if you will, to this season for Tom Brady? Still think he's going to be great. Crap, he almost won the MVP last year. I thought he should have won the MVP last year. but I think that is at least somewhat a factor, but more so Tom's offensive line. Today, they just lost their guard, possibly for the season. We know that Ryan Jensen, their center, like by the skin of his teeth, avoided a season-ending injury. He won't, at best case scenario, he won't be back until mid to late December. We know Tristan Wirfs has dealt with injuries. We know the guard that retired last year, forgetting his name, Ali Marpet retired, so he's gone. So that Bucs offensive line is getting kind of thin. And when you look at Tampa Bay's schedule, they play a lot of teams, with great pass rushes, okay? So you look at Tampa's schedule, they start out with Dallas. We know Micah Parsons, what he brings to the table. So, what are they going to do against him? Then they play the Saints on the road. We know the Saints have, Dennis Allen, they've really had Tom Brady's number throughout his career, right? So that's a great pass rush. Green Bay's pass rush isn't as good as Dallas's or the Saints, but it's still very, very good. You still have Preston Smith, getting to the quarterback. The Chiefs have Chris Jones, up the middle, interior defensive lineman, and that's really where Tampa is the weakest, is inside guard center. So that's an issue. Falcons are no problem. Pittsburgh, all they have is the guy who tied Michael Strahan's single season sack record, TJ Watt. You still have Cameron Hayward. So and we know Pittsburgh, year in, year out, ever since the 70s, the Steel Curtain, they've never gotten to that level again, but they always have a great defensive line year in and year out. It's the Pittsburgh way. They have great defensive lines, and they have great receiving units. So the defensive line is going to be a factor when Tampa plays Pittsburgh on the road, right? You're talking about when they play the Ravens. They also have an excellent pass rush. Okay, the Rams. Aaron Donald's pretty good, in case you haven't heard. They got to deal with him. Again, inside, interior defensive lineman that can get to the quarterback. Okay, you play Cleveland, Myles Garrett. Some argue a top 5 defensive player in football. I think you can make a very strong case for that. Okay, you play the Saints again, of course. You play the Niners with Nick Bosa, elite pass rusher. The Bengals have a very good pass rush. The Cardinals have J.J. Watt. So you play a lot of teams this season with some dudes that can get to the quarterback consistently and at a high level. And we saw, just go back and look at the tape, how well Tampa fared against the Rams with the beat-up offensive line in the playoffs. It wasn't pretty. Aaron Donald had a day. Von Miller had a day. And those guys just consistently, the fact that Tampa almost pulled that game off after being down 27-3 is unbelievable. Some of it was aided by some Rams mistakes, but it was a long, long day for that Bucs offense until literally at the last 5 minutes of the game. I'm not sure if they'll be able to hold up for that long this go around when they play teams like the Rams, Niners, Steelers, Ravens. So that's, the Saints. Again, the Saints, Dennis Allen really had Tom Brady's number since he's been in Tampa. And Tom, throughout his career, has always had very good offensive lines, which helps even more because Tom is very get the ball out of your hands quick. I think I read he gets the ball out of his hands on an average at 2.4 seconds. That may have to go down to about 2 seconds because that offensive line isn't going to do him any favors. I mean, that's double-digit games against teams that are, have excellent defensive lines, great pass rushes. And so that's my biggest concern for the Bucs this year. That's, to me, is going to be the biggest. If Tampa doesn't make a Super Bowl run this year, to me, that will be the biggest reason why. It's because their offensive line lost Ali Marpet in the offseason. They've lost Ryan Jensen in training camp. They lost another starting guard in training camp. So now it's Tristan Wirfs, their left tackles, dealt with a lot of injuries during training camp. So that is, you do not want to go into the season with really, as they always say about offensive lines, it's like the air conditioner, air conditioning unit, the AC. You only notice it when it's not working. You only notice an offensive line when they're not playing well. Nobody gave the Great Wall of Dallas in the 90s the credit they deserved up until they retired, until Troy Aikman was suffering concussions and getting the crap beat out of him. And it was like, oh man, that offensive line in the 90s was really good. We don't ever notice until they're gone. That's why we talked about Cincinnati's offensive line as much as we did last year, because they were so bad, and it was a miracle that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase got them as far as they did. So I think that's something to keep your eye out for with the Bucs this year. But hey, it's great to have Tom Brady back at training camp, for Tampa Bay. I was reading an article, the players talking about it was a different energy at practice. Yeah, absolutely. It's, it's the heartbeat of your team, heartbeat of your locker room, coming back to practice. So good for Tampa. Todd Bowles looked like he wasn't horribly confident that Tom Brady was going to play the last preseason game. Don't think he really should. I don't think Tom Brady at this stage of his career needs preseason games, especially when you look at these teams across the league. I mean, folks, no starters are playing. I mean, Kansas City really stands out. The fact that a quarterback of Patrick Mahomes' caliber is playing multiple drives in the preseason. And that probably has something to do with the fact that Andy Reid is, I wouldn't call him an old school coach in terms of his schemes because he's very with it. He's probably still the best offensive coach in football. But the fact that, he is sort of that generation, wanting to get guys reps in the preseason, which of course we know is a risk because it's an exhibition game. It does not count on your record, and you could lose some guys. It's not a great risk reward, but I think it's at least significant. Moving back to the NBA for just a second here. This Kevin Durant story really will just not go away. I look forward to this thing being over soon. Whether he stays in Brooklyn, he gets traded, it is the story that I really wish would end as soon as possible. But according to Shams Charania, he said, let me pull up the tweet here. Here we go. He said, quote, that the Memphis Grizzlies were interested in acquiring Kevin Durant, but, quote, the Grizzlies have 5 first-round picks to theoretically utilize in a Kevin Durant trade, but sources say that they will not make Jaren Jackson Jr. or Desmond Bane available. Well, if that's not the case, you're not getting Kevin Durant. Okay, because the Nets aren't just going to take draft picks. Okay, the Nets have a good enough team. The Nets are in a really tough position. They have a good enough team to make the playoffs. To, if they made the right trade, maybe compete in a first-round series, maybe win a first-round series. They're not going to suck. Even if they make this trade to get KD out, you still have a solid roster. It's a good enough roster to at least get in the play-in tournament and possibly make the playoffs. So you might as well at least capitalize on that. But if you're Memphis, obviously you're not trading Ja Morant. He's the face of your franchise. Jaren Jackson Jr. is your second best player. Desmond Bane's your third best player. If you're not going to trade one or the other or even both, you're not getting KD. That's to me what is, really kind of baffled me about this whole fiasco is that these teams that have offered to trade for KD have offered they've offered their draft picks, but they've offered their 5th or 6th best players. It's that's not going to cut it. As high maintenance as Kevin Durant is, he's still Kevin Durant. You're going to have to give up a haul to acquire him. But let's just say hypothetically, because it's not realistic to say the Grizzlies get KD without giving up Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, or both. So let's just say they traded them both. Traded the first-round picks, brought KD in. I don't think it really impacts the Grizzlies that much in terms of title contention. Are they in the running? Absolutely. If your tandem is Ja Morant and Kevin Durant, you got something. But you give up depth. Okay, we give up. Go look at Jaren Jackson Jr. and how he played when Ja Morant went down against my Warriors in that second round. Jaren Jackson Jr. was having himself a series. He was given up until, until late in the games, he was giving Draymond Green a defensive player of the year, mind you, fits. And so, getting big stops on the defensive side of the floor, right? Block shots. He's long, he's quick, agile. He can stay with guys on the perimeter. Again, can reject shots inside. So you take that away. So there goes your rim protection. I don't really trust Brandon Clark or Steven Adams long-term in that department, certainly as much as I do JJJ. KD's a good rim protector, but you don't want him to be your primary rim protector. You give up Desmond Bane, who's also a very good defensive player and an excellent three-point shooter. You give that up. So again, you're taking away depth. Again, you're taking away assets for the future, first-round draft picks, and you're not sure if KD's going to be happy 2 years from now. Because if Golden State couldn't make him happy, not really sure who would. And that's why you're seeing teams around the league kind of hesitate a little bit to give up draft picks. Because they're saying, timeout. He's got 4 years left on his deal. Brooklyn catered to his every single request. Whether it was the hiring of Steve Nash, whether it was, teaming up with Kyrie, Whether it was 2 years before that, firing Kenny Atkinson as the head coach, whatever KD said, Brooklyn went with it. And he's still unhappy. Teams like Memphis, Boston, they're not going to cater to KD the way that a Brooklyn Nets team would, the way that a desperate franchise would. So that's what's really been stalling this whole situation. And then you had Joe Tsai, the owner, basically saying, bro, we ain't trading you. So I'm going to be really interested. Again, I maintain, I do believe KD, regardless who he plays for, as long as he stays healthy, knock on wood, he will be available for opening night. Now, will his heart be in it? Will he be disgruntled? Certainly if he's in Brooklyn, yeah. But we know KD, he always talks about all the time, just want to hoop. I love hooping. You know, Draymond Green, who was teammates with KD for 3 years, he said, I've never met a human being, never met another individual who truly loved just the pure game of basketball as much as Kevin Durant does. So he's not the type of dude that I think would just hold out. He's not the type of dude like a James Harden in Houston, which James Harden, to his credit, is finally taking care of his body now. But in Houston, where he's disgruntled, he wants out, the franchise initially doesn't trade him. So he's like, okay, I'm just basically going to get fat and eat my way out of Houston. And that's what he did. Didn't really participate in training camp, film sessions, just kind of pouted on the team. I'm not sure KD's that type of guy. I could be wrong, but I just don't think he's that type of guy. But again, if Memphis thinks that they can avoid trading any of their three best players to go get KD, they are sadly mistaken. Of course, then again, maybe they're just sort of dabbling in the water a little bit, trying to see how it could play out. Be the change you wish to see is in the comments. They say Memphis will cater. So, okay, so you think Memphis will cater to KD's request. Memphis wants that spotlight. Well, Memphis finally, really for the first, the grit and grind era, with Gasol, Conley, Tony Allen, they were in the spotlight, but you got to realize this is the first year that the Grizzlies are going to play on Christmas Day, which leaves, I think, the Charlotte Hornets is the only team in the NBA to have never played on Christmas. So the Grizzlies are getting their first Christmas Day game this year. It's going to be against the Warriors. But I think with the type of superstar player that Ja Morant is, how they went from pretty good, young upstart team in 2021 to, wow, this team might be a title contender, to 2022, how they made that big jump. Taylor Jenkins is an excellent head coach. They draft well. They're deep. They're well run. So I think Memphis is in the spotlight. I don't think they're a type of team that needs KD to be in the spotlight. Brooklyn did. Brooklyn was not in the spotlight. Yes, they made the playoffs, but nobody ever looked at them as like, okay, they might be building a championship contender here. Not until KD and Kyrie joined. That's why Brooklyn did cater to their every move. Memphis, unlike Brooklyn, has a culture. They are building a culture. Again, Golden State is the best culture maybe in sports, and KD didn't like that. So I think that's what other teams around the league are looking at, without a question. The last thing before we get out of here, we just went from NFL, NBA, and back to the NFL for our last topic. Let me pull this up here. So, first of all, I want to congratulate the Baltimore Ravens. Man, their preseason dominance is incredible. Okay, they beat the Cardinals 24-17 last night to extend their NFL record 22 straight preseason wins. It's incredible. So they'll be, when's their last preseason game? Is it this Thursday? Let's check the preseason week 3 schedule. Let's see, the Baltimore Ravens. Okay, they play the Commanders on Saturday night at 7 Eastern. And according to Vegas, they're 6.5-point favorites. Of course they are. They've won 22 straight preseason games. But, congrats, I guess a weird congrats to Baltimore, for extending the streak. But they beat the Cardinals last night, 22 straight preseason wins. But the bigger story, of course, we all know the number one story surrounding the Ravens is Lamar Jackson's contract. As I talked about in this show, he's basically told the Ravens, if we don't have a deal done by week 1 of the regular season, I'm cutting off talks, and we'll talk during free agency. If you don't want to pay me, I'm going elsewhere. So, excuse me. So it's been really no secret Now, Lamar wants to be not just the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, at least tied with Aaron Rodgers in that department, but the highest paid quarterback in terms of guaranteed money in NFL history. That title, unfortunately, belongs to Deshaun Watson. So if anybody takes the title from him, I'd be very happy if it was Lamar Jackson, because I love Lamar. I don't really like Deshaun for obvious reasons. But here's the thing. The Ravens have waited too long, and they're a well-run franchise too, but they're making the same mistake that Dallas did with Dak Prescott. Instead of the instant that Dak was ready to get paid and eligible to get paid, they waited. And they continued to wait. And then they franchise tagged him, and that price just went up, 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 until eventually Jerry and Steven are like, man, if we don't pay him, we're going to have to really just completely destroy our salary cap in order to keep him. Or we let him go and we don't have a quarterback. So we're going to have to pay him. I think the same is true in Baltimore. They've waited too long. That price has continued to go up. And so now it's like they almost have to give Lamar this deal, because if not, either they overpay him or they're without a quarterback. Again, as I've said before, you better pay Lamar now, because Burrow and Herbert are eligible next year to get their extensions, and Lord knows what they're going to get. So go ahead and give Lamar his money now before those two guys are up. Again, I say Lamar was 8-3 with the Ravens. At one point, November, they had the best record, number one seed in the AFC. Lamar gets hurt, they don't win a game after that. Keep in mind, they were 8-3 with the most beat-up secondary in the league. So Lamar was having to win multiple shootouts, and with basically no healthy running backs. Like their top three running backs all went down in the first month of the season, and Lamar still got him to where he got him. But then, of course, like I said, he gets hurt, and that's all she wrote for the Baltimore Ravens last season. That's why I'm telling you, the Ravens are kind of my sleeper team this year. I think they're going to win the AFC North, and I think they are a legit Super Bowl contender if they stay healthy. More specifically, if Lamar Jackson stays healthy. So that's all I'm saying. They need to go ahead and give him his money now, because if they don't, either they're without a quarterback or they'll have to overpay him, considering what Herbert and Burrow make next year. Even this, let's just take Burrow and Herbert out of the picture. Let's say Lamar does have a big season. Let's say the Ravens do have playoff success, which I believe that they will. That in itself is going to drive the Lamar price up. So you want to go ahead and get this deal done now while you can, without a question. Let's see. Be the change you wish to see in the comments. The Ravens are frugal and are swimming upstream with Roman, talking about Greg Roman, the offensive coordinator. I've heard people say, I heard Steve Young make similar comments, the Hall of Fame quarterback from the San Francisco 49ers. I heard him say something similar about how the Ravens are kind of holding Lamar Jackson back. Do I wish that they would throw the football more often? Yes, because I do think Lamar is a better throw of the football than people give him credit for. Is he Rodgers? Is he Herbert? Is he even Kyler? No, he's not. But he's still a very, very accurate quarterback, especially late in games. So, do I think that they have tied their sort of tied themselves too much to Greg Roman? Sure. I think Lamar could be successful, especially at this stage of his career, with how he has developed with any elite offensive coordinator in football. I think Greg Roman was good for Lamar to start his career, just maybe not so much so now. But I didn't agree with Steve Young that the Ravens were holding Lamar back. I didn't agree with that, because they've drafted well. They've drafted, some really good offensive linemen. They brought in guys like Mark Andrews, who's an elite tight end. Again, I would say an elite tight end, so underrated. So I wouldn't say they've held Lamar back, but do I think that they have hitched their wagon a little bit too much to Greg Roman in 2022? Yeah, probably so. But I think you make a good comment or a good point in the comments. All right, that is all the time we have for today's show. Appreciate everybody stopping by. As always, be sure to catch Carving It Up Live on Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific time on Facebook Live, YouTube, and on Twitter. Also, be sure to catch the Carving It Up podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Anchor, as well as wherever you listen to your podcast. Be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Carving It Up Podcast. Helps the channel grow exponentially. And be sure to follow me on all my social media platforms, which you see down there on the stream. So, have a great week, everybody. See y'all on Thursday. Stay safe out there. God bless you all.
Peace out.
Better get Lamar his money. You better. Thanks so much for watching the show on YouTube. Be sure to click that big red subscribe button and go check out the other clips and full shows of Carving It Up Live. Have a blessed day.